And we are recording. Hello, this is Laura Ward here with Mary Abrams. We are a month into social distancing and social isolation. And Mary is one of my teachers, somebody who I've studied with since April of 2014. I took my first class with you. So, hello, Mary.
Hi, Laura. It's great to be with you. I can't believe it's been over a month since we got to actually hug each other and move in the same room together, but this is good. I'm happy to be joining in any way that's possible.
Yeah. So I wanted to, here's my first question. This is my question that I'm asking everyone that I talk to. Mm-hmm. How do you find resource for yourself? Like, how do you maintain your energy? What are the key ingredients in your life to feel that you're in a sort of balance? And I realize that balance can come and go, but how do you resource yourself?
Mm-hmm. Well, the key to that is regularly just checking in and appreciating what I'm actually experiencing on a kind of sensation, energy, feeling level with my actual physical body, because that gives me some really direct information about what I might be needing. And so that's the main thing. And then with that, I have a lot of various choices and options that I make. And then some of these are things I do kind of as a daily ritual at specific times of the day, because I find that helps me orient to the day. And then some things are things I do to as they come up, kind of like as needed. So for instance, I try to create time in the morning before I get up, I take a shower. That's important for me. And then I just sit and breathe and feel my body. And it could be anywhere from 15 minutes. I usually try to get in a half an hour. It could be longer than that sometimes. But somewhere between 15 minutes and a half an hour feels really essential, just to kind of help me orient to, again, noticing what's happening in my body and just appreciating the movement of my breath as it softens and awakens and gets me going for the day. And then always at some point during the day, there's an exploration that includes a different kind of breath, sound, and movement practice. When I'm teaching, working with clients, which I've been able to do not every day, but many days during this time, I get to automatically do it with someone else. But then there's times when I just do it for myself. And again, depending on how much I'm feeling, I might do that a few times throughout the day if I'm starting to feel particularly kind of highly activated or starting to feel really like blah, and like not quite finding myself. And then during this whole time, it's been really important to get out and take a walk every day. There's only one day I did not get out and take a walk, and it was a bad weather day mostly. But it could be an hour-long walk, it could be a shorter walk, it could be a couple hours. Fortunately, I live near the East River, and so going outside around the corner of the building and to the East River Park has been really a huge gift. But even just kind of walking around the neighborhood a little bit is helpful, just to get the air and that sort of motor movement with a kind of rhythmic consistency has been something that's always been important for me for different reasons over the years. So those are kind of my key, I would say, personal well-being practices. And then, I do my best to eat well, but I'm not being too controlled about it, in the sense that I'm not trying to micromanage my diet. And I'm really trying to give myself the opportunity to sleep, knowing that there are mornings when I have appointments to get up for, but making sure that's because my nervous system needs sleep in a way that I've had to really work with over the years. I think I'll just pause there.
Yeah. So I'm just going to fill in if anyone's watching this or whoever might be watching this, that Mary Abrams runs a studio in New York City called Moving Body Resources. It's a studio that provides space for a lot of different movement and bodywork practitioners. And she offers classes and workshops within that space when people can be in the same room together. And I've been taking her, based on the work of Emily Conrad, Continuum Movement. Mary calls it Moving Body Innovations now that Emily Conrad has passed, and there's maybe a little bit of question as to who can call what continuum. So let me ask you, I know that you've had this studio for 14 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, you had another studio in New York City. And I've heard you speak about how that arose for you. And I would love to hear that again, like how it initiated that you had a studio. And I'm just going to add more to this question. So you came from a dance background and you met Emily, I think when you were around 25?
No,
Oh,
I was more like 32, I think.
oh, okay. Oh, so like for 25 years ago. Yeah. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So 32. So you'd been dancing for a while. So if you don't mind just filling in a little bit of your dance background into the momentum to get a studio in New York City.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Iowa in a small town and started taking dance lessons with our next door neighbor. And I always loved dancing. I think for me, it was really important I'm a short person, a small body. And I think that if I hadn't discovered dancing, I wouldn't have had a way to actually experience the presence of my body, because I think I got overwhelmed in a lot of different ways by other kinds of physical activities. And then I did happen to decide, I went to college and decided to major in dance at a nice liberal arts school in southern Minnesota called St. Olaf. And then a few years later, after living in Minneapolis, I really wanted to move to a culturally dense and diverse environment. And so I decided to come to New York. And I really focused on dancing and choreographing in what we call the downtown scene for a good 10 years after I moved here. But during that time, about 6 years in, I guess, I was introduced to the work of Emily Conrad and Continuum Movement through my ballet teacher, who was Cynthia Babbitt then. And in my first workshop with Emily, witnessing her explore some breath and sound, particularly the primordial breath for me, I felt like as a creative process and a sort of creative performer, that I witnessed in her something I was really, really trying to cultivate within myself and striving for, which was the most ease in kind of that transformational moment of when you can really drop into a performance or become something quite different than what you are in a pedestrian way, but not separated from what you are. And so when I witnessed her do the primordial breath, I felt like, oh, that's it. That's exactly what I'm striving for. And also the breath sound and the movement explorations and the awakening of fluidity. I felt like I came home in my bodily experience in a way that I had been getting very lost from focusing on dance and technique and choreography and fundraising and politics and, you know, all this stuff involved in being a career artist. So as I found myself coming home more and more, I got more interested in being with other people in this kind of inner dwelling of creativity and movement. And so I got interested in teaching and did a lot of workshops and things with Emily in those first 5 years, with Emily and her associate, Susan Harper, and eventually was introduced to Emily's former husband, Gary David, who had been very involved in helping or supporting Emily in the development of Continuum in many ways over the years they were together. But I became one of among the first group of people who were authorized to teach Continuum. Sorry, that's my phone in the background. And so I was one of those first in, well, at the end of 1999, year 2000, 25 people, I think it was, were authorized, and I was among that group of people. And so as I was starting to teach my own classes, I actually started teaching around 1996 in spaces that I either rented, or for a period of time I was living with somebody and we had a space. But my need for space continued to develop, and my teaching continued to develop. And around 1999 is when I say Moving Body Resources started. Because that was when I made that leap into full-time self-employment, and I first shared a space with a Pilates training program then called the Kane School of Core Integration.
Oh, I know Kelly.
Yeah.
I studied with her a long time ago.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And so Kelly and I shared a space together here in New York City on 17th Street.
I know that space.
Yeah.
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Small world.
And yeah. And then a couple years after, it was clear that, they were growing, I was growing, and I needed a space kind of dedicated to the aesthetics of what I was doing. So then I ended up moving just to the other side of that building on 18th Street, where I had a bigger space and 3 small offices that I started renting to practitioners. And we were there for 4.5 years, and again, outgrew that space. It was also becoming condominiums, so we had to move out. But the perfect timing in a way, because then we ended up, after 8 months and a lot of yada da, in the space where we've been now for 14 years, which is an amazing place. It's a physical space that is just really, it holds us really in such a beautiful way. It's in a wonderful location in terms of Manhattan for people to access it from all, from coming into the city from all directions. And we really, really have an amazing landlord that I'm very grateful for, especially at a time like this. Yeah. So the progression was really, it was a need for my own space to be teaching. But, Manhattan real estate's expensive, so there's no way, well, unless I suddenly started having like 100 people in every class I teach, I needed other people to join in the need for space. And so Moving Body Resources functions as a rental space for practitioners of pretty much anything and everything that exists in this world of self-development, well-being, healing, all of those things.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask a couple of questions.
Okay.
But this is a question. How do you feel like, because I feel like when I take your class, I feel so accepted. I feel and contained in such a non-judgmental container. Like I find that incredibly rare in any kind of movement world, to be somewhere where you really feel free for anything that comes up to be expressed. And I feel like you hold that space so, I want to say lovingly, like it's emotional for me even to think about like just what that space is, but it's so different in my experience than really any other place. Well, I feel it in the continuum community to a certain degree, but especially with you, because I have studied with other continuum teachers who are wonderful and I like, but there's something that is very open, clean slate with you. I feel like there's not a whole lot of extra details that are important other than just showing up and being in a body and being truthful. And so when I first started coming to you, I was like, I'd been teaching at Equinox a ton, and I'm a movement analyst, so I'm coming from a somatics background sort of, and had studied with Liz Koch a lot. And I was thinking, oh yeah, now everyone's gonna get into this because I'm getting into it. It's the coolest thing in the world. And I remember saying to Eric, oh, I think it's going to get much more popular. And he said, it'll never happen. And that was like something that you had said. Could you talk about why that is, why like this part of the world, it's so free? And I think this goes into the next question about epistemology of movement, like how the levels of this is the type of movement I want to do right now and how that lands in my body. And as a complete omnivore who does everything from ballet to continuum with lots of like African dance and capoeira in the middle. What do you think? Like, that's coming from me. So I like to eat it all. I like the whole sandwich. But just talking about what do you think requires people to take the, I'm not going to say anymore. I'll let you answer it.
Okay. Well, first, I'd just like to say I'm so very touched at the way you speak of your experience in class with me and the space with me and all that we can do together individually and collectively. It makes me a little bit teary and emotional just to hear you say that. So thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I think to come to your question more directly, first of all, I just like to say, well, never is an awfully long time. So I do hold that it's possible at some point in the presence of humanity on this planet that it could be possible that everyone would want to take these classes and do this kind of exploring together. And it doesn't seem that we've reached that level of development as a human species yet. And the primary reason is because our experience of body and what the meaning of body is for us is still on its own developmental process within us in terms of how we create meaning with our body and what that means to us as we experience what we call a body. So I'm going to kind of speak to this a little bit more specifically using the epistemological profile work of, well, I've learned this through Gary David, who, as I mentioned, was Emily Conrad's former husband. And he comes from a jazz background, being a jazz musician and epistemologist who worked with a man named J. Samuel Bois, who comes from the general semantics world of Alfred Korzybski. So I'm just kind of naming the lineage of where this particular epistemological profiling comes from. And the key piece in this kind of in the general semantics orientation and this profile is recognizing that all, as human beings, the first order of meaning making comes from the silent processes of our physical body. This is, connected with everything that's going on in the universe at any one moment in time, or in all moments of time. The human body is one expression of all that's going on, and without words, this bodily process came into being, and that is a meaning-making process in and of itself. And we tend to then abstract meaning from the silent level processes because we have the neurological design and that we do. And all of our feeling processes, our affect emotional processes are hugely influenced, not just part, but they're all involved in the ways in which we create meaning at these, what I'm going to call higher order levels, where language and thought begin to become part of our experience. So recognizing that all that's at play at a very kind of early stage, we could call this stage 1 of development. If we would orient to the body as an object. And we basically only notice the body when something goes wrong with it. So it's an object that we don't have any control over, and that, again, like we notice it when it's in pain or not in pain, right? So that's one meaning of body. It's just an object. And in that sense, it's kind of divorced from all the other parts of our experience. At another stage, in stage 2, then the body becomes, it's still an object, but now it's an object that has parts that we can dissect and label. And so we're still, we're just getting interested in more details of the bodily, but it's an ordered system that comes together in a certain way, and you can just describe all the parts of it. It's a particular kind of logic involved in that way of understanding the body, or creating meaning from this concept of body. So at yet another stage of development, stage 3, the body, we recognize that the body is a dynamic process. So yes, it's a kind of an object. We could say this particular object has these parts that we can label and see them in certain orders. But really the order isn't as important as the dynamics between the parts and the parts with themselves within the environment. So that at this level of dynamic process, we begin to recognize that there are, we would probably call them laws, the laws of the dynamics, right? You do this, cause and effect, right? This happens, then this happens. These 3 things happen, and then this happens, right? And so we work really hard at stage 3 to understand those laws. We want to become an expert or a master at those laws so we can perfect them and have control over our bodily experience. So what we see in terms of where we are as humanity, we're more oriented at stage 1, 2, and really at stage 3 a lot of the time. Nothing wrong with that. It's something we do. In a way, we could say all of those stages are necessary parts of our development. Yet what happens then when you start to engage with something like continuum, and I say something like continuum because my feeling is there are endless practices in this world that could offer this same way of creating meaning with the body. But what continuum and other practices can do then is start to recognize that the body is not just a dynamic process, but the body is an inquiry. This is a whole, this is a dynamic process of events. These are parts and systems that have all these relationships going on, and that we're participating with all of those dynamics and inquiring what happens when I participate this way, or what happens when I participate that way. And as we participate with inquiry and interest, what do we begin to discover about the experience of body? And that's precisely what continuum's all about. It's about that inquiry. So, and part of the reason how this becomes important, I can use an example from my own life, is that at a certain point in my own mastery of becoming a dancer and choreographer, my own body and my emotionality was really breaking down because I was training, doing, getting stronger in certain ways, but other parts of me were saying that's not enough. And I was kind of emotionally having a really difficult time with feeling resourced and confident, and physically I was finding it very difficult to keep moving at the same level I was moving. My immune system was starting to talk to me saying, something's too much here. And so as I began to explore continuum, all of that started to, the meaning of movement, the meaning of body began to really come alive for me in a whole new way. And when I spoke earlier about coming home, I felt like I came home to that silent level knowing that captured my interests as a young person when I first started experiencing my body in the world, as well as when I first started playing as a dancer. So I'll just pause there.
Okay. So adding that to, so we could say that certain systems of movement or ways of moving belong in that first, second, third, or fourth category. Like if we are militaristic movement, like from the outside, it's completely enforced, do it like this, there's one right way and one wrong way, and I'm going to tell you how that is. Where would we put that on the spectrum?
That would be in stage 3, because you master the dynamics, you master the technique, and then you become an expert at that technique for a certain purpose.
Okay. And so ballet or yoga could be the same thing, depending on the practitioner, pretending like,
exactly.
yeah, depending on the way, the approach.
Right.
And so I'm just going to add in something that for me, I've always been a creative person. Like I went to my first ballet class when I was in first grade, and all they did was sit on the floor and do this with their feet. And I was like, that is not dancing. I know what dancing is. And dancing is charging around the room and having a relationship with the music and moving to it. And that did not happen in my first ballet class. So in first grade, I was like, no, I can't do this. This is not for me. And my mom put me in some different, creative movement classes for children where I got to, be an animal or do those things. And I think for me, they were actually more, I don't have any great memory of those either, but the great memory I have of being a mover was dancing around the living room to the Nutcracker Suite or Swan Lake or whatever. And this is it. And it wasn't until later I began to be able to rein myself in enough to do a form. Like, okay, I'm going to learn tap dancing because it's immediate gratification. We have shoes on, we can make noise, whether we can do it or not, there's an instant gratification. And then shortly after I could get back into jazz and ballet and all that different stuff. But improvisational movement has always been like really key for my creative process. But I felt like as I got older, I mean, I can still do most of the things I could ever do. And I also worked in fitness, but I felt as I was getting older, there's like a dry brittleness. And again, it's an imposition into a lot of those things. Improvisation, not so much, depending on what your drive is, what you're trying to accomplish with the improv. Like, are you just playing in the music, or are you trying to show something, or whatever? But then as I got older and discovered what this realm of movement was, where it's not even I'm doing something with my bones or my muscles, it's just I'm finding fluidity. I'm allowing my body to participate in whatever way feels good. And for a long time, it took a while to not just focus on what hurt, like to be able to get away from pain and move towards pleasure more. And I'm just giving this background of my background of how I came into this as a way of looking through, again, these levels of coming into this inquiry where it's my participation and my awareness and my noticing that brings this interior life, which is so rich and so surprising, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen anytime we get there. And it's never the same. You can do the same map. You can do the same sounds, the same, like, I'm going to touch here and I'm going to touch there and I'm going to make a certain sound, but it's always going to feel different. And so that to me became the most interesting thing, like, okay, after 40, what happens? Like, yeah, you can do all this stuff, but what's happening to your tissue? What's happening to your body? I'm looking at all these women in fitness and dance, and it's like, wow, their bodies are diminishing in this weird, rigid, crusty bird way. And I don't want that. So like, I don't want to be judgmental, but I am being judgmental. I can't help it. But within the movement of continuum, there's a space for finding, or the body, the breath, the fluidity, the things that you offer. There is such a space for expansion and experience and being in the unknown and being comfortable with whatever's coming up. So I feel like that comes up to that space of the responsibility of ourselves, right? Of our self-responsibility to grow, to be alive. And I guess to me, I saw a video recently of Susan Harper talking that was made recently. And she talks about, like, it's about our responsibility as humans to open this stream of our creative life, our vitality, so that we're not locking it up and shutting it down. And so many movement styles can be very appealing with the right and the wrong. So that's what I was coming back to, like the imposition of will. Like, is there a right way and a wrong way? And am I going to tell you what it is? Or are you just going to be able to find out what that is in the space? Like, when you become your own master without the sense of mastery, but just participation.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
In my ideal sense, yes, we become masters of participating. And also implied in that is, as I become a master of participating, I also have to start all over every time I'm participating.
Yeah.
So
Every time is a new time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of not knowing that's going to happen as I'm, participating with all of that. Yeah. Um, we all have deeper feeling needs that go on throughout the course of our lives, and those deeper needs continue to, though they change over time. And I think where I'm kind of coming from these days is, my guess is probably 75 to 90% of those needs are really bodily needs, and then that extra 25 to 10%, however it is, that's beyond that is just cultural. And I get, I have options for which ones I orient and give the most value to at what time. And, in a sense, right now, we're all in this question of what are my personal needs for safety and well-being and creativity during a time when my cultural options are completely limited in ways that I never would have dreamed of. And yet we also have all these cultural options for engaging and creating, like what we're doing right here over this, online medium. So, but really my day-to-day experience is, 90% of, I wake up in the morning, I feel this body, and what, what's being needed now. And so, the do it this way or do it that way phenomenon, it's just limited. That's all. Because 90% of the people can do it this way and it'll work perfectly for those 90%. And then there's always that 10% who would do it and it won't work at all. Or it'll work kind of, or something else will happen. And so nothing is exactly right or wrong. Again, you're still going to wake up in your own experience of it and still have to participate on some level and decide what you want to try next. And as I was listening to you speak, one of the things that struck me the most is this way in which you described differentiating between what feels right from the inside out. So in a sense, what is that kind of deeper silent level bodily need that will serve my well-being and my creative thriving here on this planet at this time? And what's that in relationship to these external goals that I could be trying to force my body into, which will then, I think you used the word crusty.
Crustification.
Yeah, which could then create, I might have a certain form and look a certain way and be achieving a certain ideal, but it's externally driven. It doesn't necessarily have to do with how I can feel more full and alive and sensual and juicy and really resourced to keep moving in my life no matter what age I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's totally, yeah. I mean, it's fun. It's like the internal participation and richness that can be found that also then can inform all the form-based things. Like I can bring this in and play in my, because I still do all the fun other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I still like to be really engaged, and I like to find alignment in different ways. Like it's fun to me to play in all those different swimming pools.
Mm-hmm.
And splash around, but coming back to this sense of resourcing, mm-hmm. and finding fluidity and presence and awareness and bringing that into, because I mean, in so many ways, like when you study ballet, you learn so much about feeling inside your body, but you're still feeling inside a form that has to be a certain way, a very judgmental thing. Mm-hmm. And like no matter what, like my body will never be a good ballet body. It will never have the right feet. I'll never, like there's no, it's unattainable. In this lifetime, it's impossible. But it's still fun for me to play in that place, but it can be crazy also. Mm-hmm. So it's like, those two bouncing back and forth between the realms gives me a lot of room to be a person in whatever ways I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the relationship that I have with the people that are in our class and that show up in Continuum, having that silent movement level relationship, it's like we've attuned in a certain way, like our hearts are whatever, our bio fields, or, you know,
Mm-hmm.
our energetic fields are in this harmony. And so there's a lot of people that I don't know super well, like we haven't talked a lot, but I feel like really, really deep love and connection to them in that world, in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I feel like that's something that the somatics world and the embodiment world, I mean, we're all embodies, but those worlds have, is maybe showing up with more loving kindness and less judgment than the dance world. Yeah.
Well,
Participation as opposed to, you know, external objectification. So here's my question.
mm-hmm.
I want to ask one more question and then offer you, have you lead like a little movement, just a little taste of what it all is.
Okay.
And the question is, what is inspiring you now? What do you feel inspired by?
Well, as you ask me that question and I just pause to feel into it, you know, I'm just noticing my body starting to kind of make these little wavy movements. And in this case, they're mostly kind of going laterally, but, you know, they have a kind of a much more multi-dimensional experience of them inside. And I also noticed that I just immediately went, like my breath began to slow down. So yeah, I just keep being interested in like, what are these more complex, nonlinear movements going on, and how many different ways and opportunities do I have to actually feel into them, and how intricately the presence of breath, the movement of breath is involved and participating with all of that. You know, one in this last few months prior to even the pandemic starting, but especially as it was really heightening up, I found that I was really fascinated quite a bit with both the presence of our gut body and our heart. And so in workshops over the last 6-8 months, I've been exploring different themes inspired by gut, body, and heart. And partially in the interest of how the ancient expression of the tubular body, the vessel body, is clearly expressed through both the heart and the gut body. But also in the interest of the ways those particular organ systems are also very much alive in our thinking, feeling experience, much more so than has been giving credit to them over the years as we've gotten much more fascinated by the brain and our neurology. And so that kind of combined experience of both the physiology of these, you know, nonlinear movements, the movement of our breath that's essential to the life force flow of all of that, and then all of our thinking, feeling processes supported through heart, lung, and belly presence. So that's kind of the simplest way I can put it right now.
Well, that's
But,
great.
yeah.
That's perfect. So do you want to just give us a short, like 5-minute exploration that is whatever feels good to you to offer?
Oh, sure. Why not? So I'm gonna, let's see, what's the best way to do this? I think I'll shift my computer here so you can get a view of me on the floor. Because one of the things that becomes really important for me, especially with screen focus, and any of the activities we do as bipeds that keep us vertically upright. Sorry, is to change my orientation to gravity. So because as soon as I begin to participate with gravity in a non-vertical way, my bodily tissues, my nervous system, everything starts to orient and think differently. So it just helps to sort of clear the scene in a variety of ways. So, I don't really need my glasses for this part, so I'm going to take them off. So the first thing I'm just going to invite everybody to do is find a position that feels really absolutely comfortable for just a few moments. So it could be sitting or laying down. It might be standing up, that's cool too. And whatever relationship to gravity you find yourself landing in, just taking a few moments to soften your focus. You might close your eyes. And just to notice whatever you notice about your body. Including just noticing what's happening with your breathing. And inviting all of those parts of you that come in to make assessments, good or bad. You're just going to let the assessments drift to the periphery. And just notice the movement of your silent body, breathing body. And now I'm going to invite you to begin to play with your breath a little by just playing with the sound of the air and letting your mouth, back of your throat, kind of open and close, sort of with an ah-oh air sound. And just feel what begins to happen as you play with the And while you're continuing to play with this for just another minute or so, just letting your body start to move in any way it wants to move. You can let your breath just come back to resting, breathing again. Just continuing to notice what's happening in your body now. And the next thing I'm going to invite you to play with is just to begin to play with your hands and feet, opening So like kind of opening, spreading, maybe even reaching and extending away from the center of your body. And then letting your feet and hands begin to close. Curl in. And you might find that as you do that, your arms and legs also begin to kind of curl and close in, so that this becomes a whole body, curling in, closing in, and then eventually an opening, extending, reaching, starting with the fingers and toes, hands and feet. And so just letting this kind of opening, expanding, and then releasing and closing find its own rhythm. And you might find that your body begins to turn or shift, spiral. And that your openings and closings start to express themselves in more asymmetrical ways. And as you continue to do this, I'm going to invite you just to start to play with a simple O sound. Being interested in the way the O sound expresses both opening, like a space of opening, and yet also a space of containment. I'm going to invite you to just gently and slowly find a resting place for this. And as you come to rest, just taking another few moments to notice what's happening in the silence of your body now. With the invitation to let your body surprise you. Something might be moving, emerging, or dissolving. In a way that's new or unknown or just unexpected. I'm noticing in my own body that, along with still having a kind of fair amount of bubbly excitement for this conversation that we've been having, that I'm also feeling more fullness and ease in my breathing, kind of softer, slower, what I would call oozing, throughout my whole body. And a welcome settling. So there's a little taste for you. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. That was wonderful. My cat had to get involved. He's a little energy sensor, so he's down here.
Yeah.
Little chubbo, Lord Gaylord.
Beautiful.
He was doing a lot of sounding himself.
Great.
So I had to mute my face so it didn't pop up. So you are offering classes right now online through Zoom on Tuesdays 11 to 1 and Thursdays 10 to 12.
Yeah, that's New York City time.
Yeah, New York time. So I will put a link to Mary's Moving Body Resources site and her times for her classes.
Yeah.
Into the chat, or not the chat, into the under thing and on the YouTubes.
Okay.
That's my high-tech speak, the under thing. In this time where we're all sort of, whether we want to or not, being forced online into these different modes of being with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been such a treat to be with you, and I'm honored to have this conversation. And this could very well be my first presence on YouTube.
Oh, well, I will be very excited to be the first person presenting you on YouTube. So I will put this onto your Facebook and all those kinds of things.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for showing up to talk to me and be here with me today.
Well, thank you.
So I am going to end the recording, but I will stay online and talk to you for a second before that is done. Okay. So thank you, everybody who made it this far through. The juicy part was at the end, as you see.